Hello and welcome to the Reactive Dog Pod. I am your host, Tess Morgan. I am a multi-certified dog behavior consultant who specializes in the treatment of reactivity in dogs. Through my business, Treat Yourself Dog Training and Behavior, I help clients make progress and enjoy life again with their reactive dogs. Join me and my guests as we dive into all things reactivity. We'll explore behavior concepts, talk about real-life training plans and considerations for reactive dogs, provide tips and tricks, and discuss how we can best help reactive dogs and their families thrive. Because reactive dogs are good dogs, they just need a little bit of extra support. Let's get into it. While the main principles we use to work with reactive dogs apply regardless of location, living with a reactive dog in an urban environment poses a unique set of challenges and can make application of training exercises and recommendations significantly more difficult. Today, we're going to talk about why living with a reactive dog in the city can be more challenging, how we can best work around these issues, and practical training tips for those of you navigating this scenario on a day-to-day basis. For this episode, I am speaking with two trainers working in downtown Toronto and who, as such, are well-versed in this very topic. I myself grew up in Toronto, Canada, and every time I go back, I am absolutely floored by how difficult it can be to avoid pretty much any trigger you can think of. Before we get started, let me introduce my guests. Amanda Factor is an honors graduate of the Academy for Dog Trainers. She started her company, Benevolent Beasts, in 2017 with a focus on force-free, fear-free dog walking and pet sitting. After graduating from the Academy, Amanda added training services, specializing in reactivity and puppy socialization. As someone who walked dogs in downtown Toronto for 7 years, Amanda understands the unique challenges faced by urban guardians of reactive dogs. Her main goal is for these guardians to actually enjoy walking their dogs again. That's a good goal. Nicole Barnett is the owner of We Work for Treats and director of Sparky's Comrade. She graduated from the Academy for Dog Trainers as well and completed various other certifications since. Nicole works primarily with fearful and reactive dogs, and her local in-person services through Sparky's Comrade are primarily leash reactive dogs. She provides support with day training and walking services with a unique focus on navigating city landscape and condo life. Along with this, We Work for Treats is Nicole's other business, and it's an online community program for fearful and anxious dogs. And one course that she has that may be of particular interest to the listeners today is called Reel In Leash Reactivity. Welcome, Nicole and Amanda.
Hi, Tess.
What up?
Thank you for being here. Okay, so before we get started talking about city life, I want to talk about your own pets. So Nicole, I'll start with you because I know that Peanut has some reactivity issues. So do you want to talk about Peanut and whether she struggled with reactivity and what your experience has been like with her as a trainer?
Whether if she does, it's like an ongoing thing. And I need to preface that she's now 11 years old and I got her at 10 months. So let's just say that's an ongoing thing and it's always going to be a part of her life. She came to me labeled an ankle biter in her bio and I was like, this sounds like the dog for me. I wanted a little terrier dog who was really fast. And that's exactly what I got. And I know in my early days of working her reactivity, I was very, very strapped for cash. So I had one session I booked with a trainer, a local trainer. And it was great because I learned a lot. They had me doing engage, disengage, which is a great protocol. And some of our listeners might have been like, oh yeah, I Googled that and I've tried it. I'm not bashing engage, disengage. It actually works for some dogs, but for Peanut, it was not the right prescription for her because she was so fast. And she would lunge at anything, cyclists, people, dogs, anything that moved. She was super, super hair triggered by, along with sound sensitivities and other things outside of her leash reactivity with regards to stranger danger, body handling, and separation anxiety. So all of that really impacted her progress and my ability to focus on what's the most important. So I call that my triage training of like, I got to figure out, the priority list of what I'm working on.
Yeah, that, I have one separation anxiety dog and one reactive dog, and I sympathize so much with people who have both of those issues in one dog or both of those issues and other issues.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot of like prioritization for sure.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing. Amanda, I know you don't have a dog right now, but you certainly work with a lot of reactive dogs. You want to tell me a little bit about like, I guess they're almost like your surrogate dogs.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Like I've been working with dogs now for over 7 years, and so I will sometimes refer to them as my dogs, like in quotations, because they, sometimes they come to feel like your own dogs, even though they're obviously not your dogs. But definitely I've had some reactive dogs along the way, and I do walk some reactive dogs now. And I think doing the pet sitting with reactive dogs is a really good way to experience like what would it be like to live with this dog, I'm usually there for a week or 10 days or whatever. But
Mm.
it's like you get a little taste of like, oh, this is what this guardian's life is like every single day with this reactive dog. And I've had some amazing clients over the years who have left me these manuals. Like they'll literally write me like a manual for how to care for their dog, and they'll have all the instructions around the reactivity and everything. So yeah, so I would say even though I don't have a dog of my own, I've definitely experienced reactivity with a number of different clients' dogs.
Awesome. I was actually thinking about making like a social media, like a reel or something about like deciding how much information to include with your dog because like anyone who's worked on reactivity, you just want to include like every little like if she does this, do this. If she does this, only walk in this area. And then it's like,
Oh
how
man.
how much does this pet sitter really need to know?
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, you don't want to scare them away, but I guess at the same time, you want them to have the information.
yeah,
So I've had clients who have not been afraid. They've left me like 30-page long manuals, so which I'm very grateful for. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
page 3, okay.
It's good that there's pet sitters like you that take it seriously, for
Oh
sure.
yeah.
So I wanted to talk first about some of the common challenges that come up when you're trying to train a reactive dog in a busy city like Toronto. So Nicole, do you want to go first to talk about some of the common things that people might struggle with if they have a reactive dog in a city?
I think a big part of it is the the intricate layers of being in the city depending on your dog and their triggers. There's dogs who have just very specific triggers. Oh, my dog's super reactive to huskies, and it's like, okay, you're not going to find a lot of huskies in the city, so it's like that's easy. But when you have a lot of things that are compounding, that can be a really tough thing to navigate, or in situations where it could seem really random. I'm going to really choose my words wisely there. Could seem random. Like I noticed like Peanut's more reactive with people who are holding things. That's how it like kind of like I started picking out these little parameters with regards to Peanut. Universally though, she didn't really like people in general, but it was just worse when it was somebody was like holding something. So I think that's those are in hard layers because there's just going to be so many variables that you're going to be running into that odds are you're going to probably run into one of your dog's, people or things that they're not okay with. And then along with it is like the tight condo life. So even, in a home environment in Toronto, you're walking right out to triggers the second you leave your house. But even if you compact that with a condo situation, you're having to navigate a lot with regards to that as well. And then also the inability to potentially get distance because of heavy traffic and that kind of stuff. So it's the safety components of navigating the city.
Yeah, it's not like you can just whip across Bloor Street quickly.
No, no, that's actually something I do. I strategize with a lot of my clients. I'm like, okay, when you leave your house, we can't go right because then you'd be walking this stretch of street on the major street that has streetcars and things like that and bike paths and stuff. You can't cross that street. It is too unsafe to jaywalk. Like you could die. Okay. So we're gonna
Yeah.
make sure you're gonna go the other way when you head out, and then you're gonna take this alleyway. So then there's like 10% of your walk is maybe on the major street where 90% of your walk isn't going to be on a major street.
And even on the side streets, you're bombarded with triggers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it's just reducing your probability of getting hit by a car.
Yeah.
Like you have to think about that.
Yeah. um, Amanda, do you have anything to add to that?
I think Nicole summed it up really well. I would use the phrase like feeling like you have nowhere to go. That
Yeah, you're
whole
stuck.
feeling of like holy crap, like, are we allowed to swear? Like, where do I go? I have nowhere to go. There's a trigger over here. There's a trigger over there. Blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that overwhelming feeling, like I can understand how a guardian might start to dread their dog's walks. It's like, what do we do? So yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
Yeah. I also am like thinking while you're talking about dogs who are reactive or sensitive to noise, because even if there isn't a visible trigger, there's still the city noise, right? That you
Oh
can't
yeah.
see.
There's
Yeah.
that old joke. Oh, there's only 2 seasons in Toronto, winter and construction.
Yeah.
It's kind of true. Like it's
Yeah.
summer now. I'm walking around. Every single freaking house is having like renovations done.
Yeah.
So not only do you have the noise, but you have the men in their vests and their hard hats, and they're carrying ladders and they're carrying
Yeah.
tools. It's a whole thing. So yeah, where do you go? What do you do?
Mm-hmm. One of the recommendations I will admit to making, because it's easier to make where I am in London, is like empty training spaces. Like if you're going to work on training, or you expose your dog to triggers, find somewhere with a lot of space where you can get tons of distance. Of course, Toronto has lots of parks, and most cities will have lots of parks, but are you going to find a park where you have a good portion of it to yourself? Maybe not.
I think it depends. Sorry, I'm just jumping in and
Yeah.
I think it depends.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you will find a park that's empty, or I've even found a dog park that's been empty on, you walk by the dog park and there's no dogs there and you're like, hey, we can go to the dog park.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think some people are very adamant about like it's impossible. And I don't like, I lived in Toronto most of my life. I don't think it's impossible, but I also think it takes some creativity of finding like the secret entrances to the park, or like the little forested area off to the side of the park or whatever, and not being in the main park sometimes too. And it also depends how many triggers your dog has. Like if your dog is reactive to dogs, maybe you could find a park where there's no dogs there, but there's also people and bikes and kids and whatever else.
There's definitely parts of the city that are, or I've lived in many places in the city at this point now, and there's definitely preferred places that I've lived in that I'm like, oh my God, it just was so much more manageable because of just like the setup of the building, and the accessibility to larger spaces and stuff like that, and reduced routes with reduced triggers. But at the same time, we're talking about living in a big city in a time of recession, and the ability for somebody to just be like, well, I'm just going to move to better my dog's life is not feasible. And it's completely out of the question for a lot of people. And I think that's like a really real part of it, that we need to kind of consider. And there was a point in my life where Peanut was a cat dog. I rarely walked her because I lived in a space that just was not feasible for her.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought up the moving, because I was also going to bring up cars. When you live in a more suburban or country environment, most people are going to have cars, but not necessarily in downtown Toronto, because you don't need one. And so a lot of my advice, like if possible, is drive to a quieter place. And if you don't have a car, it's not like you can take dogs on the TTC or the subway or whatever, but not necessarily if your dog is reactive. And so it's like, okay, that's a great recommendation, but it's not accessible to me.
Yeah. Before I had a dog, before I had a car, when I got Peanut, I had a carrier, and I would take her in a carrier on my bike to places.
Yeah, and she's
Oh,
little, so
Yeah.
definitely a benefit of having a little dog.
Yeah.
So we talked about not being near triggers in or not being able to avoid triggers in close proximity. We talked about noise, tighter living situations. A lot of people also don't have a backyard. For a lot of dogs, like I'll recommend, if you can't go for a walk, go in your backyard and play with them. Maybe you don't have a backyard if you live in downtown Toronto or in another busy city. So that's an issue too. And I know, Nicole, you wanted to talk about off-leash dogs, like running dogs kind of getting away from you, or other off-leash dogs. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I had like kind of mentioned that like I guess earlier I was talking about like just the safety component of being in the city, right? Being able to just easily cross the street is a very big safety consideration. But all of a sudden an off-leash dog is like running up to you, and you're trying to create distance between that and off-leash dog. I've had situations where I'm trying to get distance, so I choose to cross the street, but that off-leash dog is going to follow me, and I have this huge sense of responsibility for the safety of another person's dog. And I've had a dog like run into the street, and then the owner yell at me that I they like did that to their dog, and I'm like, are you kidding me right now? And I had to contain myself so hard in that moment, not to like lash out at this person, but like I was like, you're the one that chose to have your dog off leash.
Yeah. Amanda?
The worst is when, okay, I feel like sometimes I very obviously make a point of like crossing the street, and I do it in like a very like dramatic way, like we're crossing the street. And then the person just like follows you across the street and you're like, no,
Yeah, people don't get it.
they don't get it.
I was walking a group of dogs the other day, and I was for a dog walker colleague of mine. I was covering for their vacation. I was like, look, and the best thing about being a dog walker is you get all the street fines before everyone gets home from work. So I'm going through this like box of like kids books. I'm like, yes, all these kids books. I'm gonna take these, and all the dogs are just sniffing and pissing on things. And I was just like, awesome. All of a sudden, this person just like walks up to me, standing there like, excuse me, and I'm like, there's all these spaces for you to go around me. So I had to leave my treasures that I was looking through so that they could go and just stand in front of the box that I wanted to like, just go already.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I think until you've had a reactive dog or worked with reactive dogs, like you just don't get it. You don't get it at all.
Yeah.
The space component. The other thing that I think will resonate with a lot of people is trigger stacking. So we talk as trainers about how if your dog experiences one stressful thing, maybe they can bounce back, but the more things that kind of pile up on top of each other, the more likely they're going to react or not be able to recover. And so that's city life for you, right? You're going to have another dog and then a stranger and then a loud sound, and then like all these things happen on top of each other, and it's hard to prevent that from happening. Amanda?
Well, I remember in the academy, we had a really great webinar about, well, I don't want to use too many techie dog trainer terms, but it was basically like, when all the stimulus is in the environment, there's just too many, right? So it's not like you can start at like a very low intensity and go higher, higher, higher. The intensity is high all the time. So you have to work with the environment that you're in. So I meant, like, Tess, you used the word creative earlier, and I think it really is just all about getting creative in these situations. Because as Nicole was saying, you can't just, it's not everybody can just pack up and, okay, I'm going to move out of the city. Like, you're in the city. What can we do? How can we be creative?
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, just to make sure that everyone who's listening is on the same page about the idea of like management versus behavior modification, or training. So when we talk about management for reactive dogs, typically we're talking about damage control. So like, trigger is too close, we need to get out of here. We need the dog to pull off to the side and do something while the trigger passes. Our dog is reacting, we need to kind of mitigate that situation. And then, and typically these are pre-trained behaviors where we train our dog at home or in low distraction environments, and then we kind of bring them into the difficult environment. And then we have the other side where we're setting our dog up in that quiet field that may or may not exist, and work and like intentionally trying to modify their behavior, help them feel better about the triggers. And so I feel like in the city, the behavior modification piece is there, but it doesn't look in that, it's not as structured as maybe it could be in quieter environments where we have that divide, where we're doing behavior modification in one area and then management in another area. And so I wanted to talk about management, because I think for a lot of people, that's going to be a huge chunk of what they're doing with their dog versus like setting them up to actually work with their triggers. And so what are some of the ways that you work with dogs to prevent them from reacting as often, or to prevent them from being triggered on walks? And that could be like strategies about where to walk, and it could also be like specific skills that you teach to manage the dog. Amanda, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so you already touched on the fact that not all urban dwellers, I should say, I was going to say Torontonians, but this isn't just about Toronto people. But if you live in a big city, you may not have a backyard, or you may not have as many, grassy fields or that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it is just about getting creative. In Toronto, we're very lucky to have an amazing network of alleyways. And I know that not every city has. I've had people say to me, I wish my city had alleyways, because I've posted like videos of me walking reactive dogs in alleyways, and they're like, oh, my city doesn't have that. But that's just one example of getting creative. I would tell guardians to try to walk their dog in alleyways, at least, in the early stages when their dog is kind of learning some new skills. And then I think you can find those quiet places. You might just have to like do some research and find them. So, and maybe you do have to walk a little bit further than you would normally walk. But, I've heard stories. I haven't done this myself, but I've heard of people going even to graveyards. If you can find a park at a quieter time, and just looking for those little like nooks and crannies within the city that would be quieter and where the dog wouldn't be exposed to as many triggers. And then, yeah, certainly I do teach guardians about the emergency exit. So, if you, even though you're trying so hard to manage and keep your dog from being exposed to triggers, if, sometimes it just happens, like a dog literally like comes out of a doorway or something, and you're trying so hard to manage, and there's a dog. So it's just like emergency exit, let's get out of here. So that's like a tool that I think city, country, wherever you are, I think every guardian should have that tool in their toolbox.
And I just want to clarify that that's typically something we would train outside of that emergency situation so that the dog knows it really well before we try to use it. Yeah.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, don't teach it to the dog when they're already freaking out in the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend recently who I like informally helped with some of the reactivity with her dog. She was like, find it thing where you scatter treats. It like doesn't work. And I was like, did you practice it at all outside of when she's reacting? And she was like, nope. Like, it doesn't work then.
Yeah.
Nicole, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess I love to kind of give permission to people to not walk their dog. I think we are kind of stuck in this idea or this concept where we need to walk our dogs 3 times a day for 30 minutes or something like that. And it's a very cookie cutter, one size fits all mindset. And I really like to shift that. And I'm very data focused. So I will propose some different ideas or different ways of mapping out a client's day based on what their dog's like struggling with or what they're excelling in. So I find like we kind of were talking about trigger stacking earlier, where there's multiple things maybe happening at the same time. We also need to talk about things happening compounding throughout the day and throughout the week. So maybe we're not walking our dog every day. Maybe we're walking our dog every other day, right? Giving a day of decompression. Perhaps we're only ever going to walk our dog right in the morning or in the afternoon or late at night, depending. If this dog's more reactive when it's dark, okay, maybe we're doing daytime, and changing up the time of day based on what is your dog's main triggers. Like my dog early on was really triggered by cyclists. So I never took her out during rush hour when the cyclists are in the mode going to work and they're just zooming by, just like piles of bikes. So, keeping that in mind, time of day, if your kid's super, if your dog's super triggered by children, right, you're not going out there when it's school hour. Like, absolutely not. That is just like you opt to do indoor enrichment at that time, right? And I think that's an important thing to kind of deconstruct this construct of our thoughts of dogs need exercise. And right now, exercise is not the priority. It is enrichment and making sure your dog is happy at the end of the day. And if that involves no walks, then by all means, I give you permission not to walk your dog.
That's a great point. And one of the things I really like that people may enjoy as a resource is Liza from Focus Dogs. They have a like exercise quadrants idea that they shared in a webinar that I watched from them. And basically the idea is that there's like high intensity and low intensity categories for both physical exercise and mental exercise, and dogs vary in how much they need of each category. But the idea is that like you're looking at these categories and trying to meet needs in all of the categories versus a certain type of walk. So like if your dog needs high intensity mental exercise, we can do trick training at home, right? If they need some physical exercise, how can we meet that need if we have a backyard or at home? Like, looking at more of the categories of what our dog needs versus like a specific type of walk, or like having to meet that in a way that's going to trigger them.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. I kind of call it like the interest-based activities.
Mhm.
And almost just like coming to a session and seeing what your dog's interested in that moment. I was just working with a dog this morning and we were doing like nose work. And then all of a sudden he was just like clobbering me, biting me. He was just like, I'm done with this. I'm like, cool. Do you want to play some tug of war? Because clearly you need to put your mouth on a toy and I'm not your
Yeah.
toy.
And tug is such a good one for like, can expend a lot of energy and can do in a small space.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. The one thing that came to mind, Amanda, when you were mentioning alleyways is like, I don't know, here the alleyways have a lot of garbage. So that's one thing to think about is like, if, you know, if your dog is the type of dog that's going to pick up garbage, just be aware of that in alleyways. Um, the one thing that I've gotten some flack from a couple people on social media about when I talk about not walking their dog is like, well, that's impossible for me because my dog needs to walk a little bit to like pee or poo.
Mm.
Oh,
And so I
this is
think,
not talking like you're taking away bio breaks.
yeah,
There are some extreme cases where I'm like, we need to come up with an idea of an indoor washroom setup for your dog for really extreme cases. But in those cases, we're also going to the vet talking about behavior medication because that dog standard of life, that's not a long-term solution. That is just a band-aid for now to then figure out a better option for bio breaks for this dog. So I'm not saying we're taking away bio breaks when I
yeah.
say don't walk your dog.
I think there's like, you know, perfection, which is like dog never is exposed to triggers and we're, you know, we're not walking them. And, you know, but the thing is like some people, obviously, if you don't have a backyard, you need to walk your dog. Sometimes even if your dog, you do have a backyard, certain dogs need to like stretch their legs a little bit before they're going to go poop or whatever. And so I think it's less about perfection and more about like minimizing triggers.
Yeah, reducing probability.
Yeah.
Yeah, like run outside for a pee or poo and then run back inside, basically. Like,
Yeah. And time your pee or poo for the times that are less triggering.
yeah. Oh, Nicole, when you were talking about the whole timing walks around school children, you know, screaming, coming out for recess or coming out for the end of the day, but one of my amazing clients who left me the 30-page manual, she was so good and she knew exactly when the local schools let out the children. So she made
Brilliant.
a note in the manual saying, okay, so this school that's out at 2:45 or whatever, so don't walk the dog around that. Like she was so good because she knew like all the triggers and when to walk the dog and everything. So, you know, the guardians that are really in tune with that stuff, those are good things to take note of.
Wow, that's awesome.
Oh yeah.
um, another thing that I see you doing a lot, Amanda, is parkour. Do you want to talk a little bit about parkour?
Oh yeah. So I don't even remember. I don't even know how it started. I don't know if I saw it on Instagram or what, but I don't know. Like it just happened. Like I just started doing parkour with dogs that I walked, and I would say at least two of them now are completely addicted to the point where they love it so much that they'll jump up on objects without me even cueing them to. So I guess I don't know if you've talked about parkour, like if your listeners know what parkour is. I mean, it's basically like parkour, like you're jumping up on things, but so for dogs, it would be you're using objects that are already in the environment. So you don't need fancy agility equipment, you know, you don't need fancy anything. You're using things that already exist in the city. So benches, you know, steps, boulders, logs that are on the ground, because in the parks there will be like these logs on the ground. Anything the dog can kind of either put their paws up on or jump on. So we do a lot of like put your paws up on the tree trunk, jump up on this step, jump up on this boulder. And I just started doing it for fun. And like I said, two of the dogs I walk are completely addicted, but it is a good thing to have in your toolbox for reactivity. And I tell all my clients about it because, you know, if we're talking about getting the dog to do something else in the presence of a trigger, why not do some parkour? Why not do, you know, up on this step, put your paws up on this tree. That way they're having fun. They're doing something else. So they're not going to be barking, lunging, going crazy. So that's just a fun little thing you can add to your toolbox.
I think it's so great, and it also you can direct where the dog is looking or where the dog is like what's in their view with parkour too. So if you have them perched up on something where there's a wall blocking them from seeing the trigger, or paws up where they're facing away from the trigger, we can strategically do these things in a way that prevents the reactivity.
Absolutely. And you can also, when your dog kind of gets the hang of it, you can start building duration. So say they do up on the ledge or whatever it is, and then you just keep them there and you kind of build up duration. So you're feeding them treats and they're just like staying. So it's like it's almost like having like a little like place behavior. When the trigger passes, you go, okay. And then they just kind of hop off. So
Yeah.
And to your point, Tess, with regards to orienting your dog's face in a certain way, right? When we feed a dog, right, their nose, their eyes, their ears point towards where the food is. So we call that position feeding, right? In dog training. I train a lot of my clients in condos or even just on the streets, especially if you're on a major street where there's a lot of like alcoves of storefronts. It's just nose in the corner. So you're just kind of like rocket firing treat after treat of treat into a corner of anything. In the lobby, in the elevator, in a storefront alcove or something like that, you see the trigger and you just start rocket firing that treat into the corner and they just are like corner, nose in the corner, corner. And you just stand there just throwing the treat.
Yeah.
Well, what did you call it, Nicole? Corner feeding? Corner.
I don't know. I call it in like my condo like navigation program. I call it like your check-in points.
Okay.
So you might have a corner in your check-in point map when you're like mapping out your condo navigation, and those check-in points serve a purpose, and you're going to kind of position feed sometimes in those moments where you want a dog in a specific location to step out of the flow of traffic. So if you're standing in the elevator, you don't want your dog nosing into the elevator door, right? You want their nose in the corner, so then they're not kind of going to go face to face with a dog if there's a dog on the other side of the elevator.
Okay, I'm gonna put a bookmark there because we have a section that I want to talk about condos and apartments specifically, and
Okay.
I'm gonna come back to you for that. The other thing that I've seen that work like both in cities and in smaller areas is like, where do people not typically walk their dogs? So, if you go to a park, that's where everyone's going to be walking their dog. But business parks, like I have one client in Toronto who walks her dog in like the U of T campus. So like university campuses may or may not have dogs. So just thinking about like, where do people typically like automatically go to walk their dogs and where do they not? And then like finding places where maybe there's still grass and stuff your dog can sniff, but it isn't like dog walking central. Another thing I wanted to mention is muzzle training. So if your dog has any risk of biting, and we're passing triggers close up potentially, we should probably be training them to wear a muzzle, for safety. And that's something that we would condition beforehand so the dog is comfortable before we're using it. And then, Nicole, did you want to talk about leash wrangling skills that would be helpful in the city?
Yeah, Amanda had her hand up on muzzles though.
Oh,
I'm curious.
all I was going to say about muzzles was that a muzzle might have the added benefit of people who are clueless, not just like wandering up to your reactive dog, right? So it kind of sends, they're perceived as like dangerous dogs. So it might kind of have that added bonus of like, people aren't going to get too close to your reactive dog.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, people come up and they're like, oh, is your dog not friendly? I'm like, I don't know. You want to give it a go? Like, let's see.
Yeah.
But I find it helps with the handler too, so going into leash wrangling, this dovetails really well. The owner side of the leash, we need to talk about that, right? And having a muzzle on your dog, just 100%, all my clients have been like, I'm a far better handler when the muzzle's on. I'm like, same with me. I'm like, I have that effect too. And maybe this dog doesn't have a bite history, but it's just like, we can take a little breath, be like, we're doing our due diligence. We have protection. Hopefully at the end of the day, if, there's contact, then, damage would be minimal. But in regards to leash wrangling, because we're in such close quarters to so many triggers in the environment, and we're walking on really narrow sidewalks without boulevards a lot of the time. So you could be like seconds away from, having your dog get hit by a car because it's like literally right there, or a cyclist because they never like to stop at the stop signs. Okay. Right. It's just like you're already so close to so many dangers. Now you also have the added layer of the reactivity component where your dog could lunge into the street. So I find we're choking up on the leash way too much. And because of the function of reactivity, a lot of times dogs are reactive because they're really pro-social. They're trying to seek access to that thing. Or on the flip side, they are scared and they're going, bark, 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 go away. I don't like you, right? There's two functions to our reactivity. And when we choke up on the leash, we are really working against those two functions, right? Our dog now is like, I want to get access to that thing and I can't physically access it. And now I really can't access it because like my front paws are coming off the ground because the leash is so tight. And then the other side of it is the dogs who are asking for social distance because they can't physically move because they're stuck on leash. Now we're really choking up on the leash, right? So we really need to rest assured that our leash length is appropriate for the environment, as in if your dog lunge, they won't go into the street, they're safe from cars, but it provides them as much of that feeling of freedom where they're not going to react even further because they feel that confinement and restriction being stuck on leash. So having really great equipment that's well conditioned on our dog's body, like harnesses and things like that, so our dog isn't feeling that restriction so much while they're on leash, especially just being in the city organically. Our leash length is probably always going to be way shorter than it would be in a suburban environment.
Amanda?
Oh yeah, this would be a good time for me to say that when I'm on Instagram and I see those beautiful reels of somebody with like, I don't even know how many feet, like a 50-foot long line or something, and they're in a field with wildflowers, and I'm like, that's aspirational content. Like, I'm sure there are places in Toronto or in a city where you could find a field to do that or somewhere to do that, but for like your everyday walking, it's just like really not realistic.
But then also on the flip side of it, a really powerful dog on a long line, I'm sorry, but I have sustained some severe injuries from a long line with really powerful dogs. Even if I have the best equipment, I have great long line wrangling skills, but I still will get hurt with a really powerful dog in the best environment possible.
I think the leash conversation is important, and it's also tricky because part of having good leash wrangling skills is being able to give your dog freedom when there's no triggers around, but also kind of knowing what to do if a trigger does show up and you have to quickly kind of get control of your dog. Because I think a lot of people would become very flustered by like, okay, the dog is at the end of the leash and now there's a trigger and like, what do I do? And that's where you see people with like their arm held out, like pulled over by dogs or that kind of thing.
Yeah, so a lot about safety of like how to hold the leash, where to keep your elbows in your hand and things like that. I do a lot of what I call fist to belly button leash locks, and also keeping your elbows into your side to protect your body, your hands and your shoulders and your whole entire body, because you can sustain really severe injuries with really powerful reactive dogs. And this goes to save with anyone, not even outside of the city. So.
And for anyone who doesn't know, leash locks are basically a way of holding the leash, so it's kind of locked into your hand so that if the dog does pull, it's less likely to slip. Like it's kind of locked in so that you can sustain a stronger pull than if it's like around your wrist or if you're just holding it kind of normally. Nicole, I have a note that you made here, hockey goalie. What does that mean?
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Maybe I'll hop up and you can post a video on this, but sometimes in really tight situations, and I guess also I wanted to maybe mention this before, but then I got lost in my thoughts. But some of the pros in the city is that like you have cars and bushes and alleyways and all of these amazing spaces to kind of hide from triggers. Like I said, with regards to like dog nose in the corner of a storefront, right? You're rapid firing, but you might need added protection, especially for dogs who get fixated, like they stare at the trigger that itself. So how can you do any body blocking with your body without one being in the line of fire of potentially your dog redirecting a bite onto you, right? You're kind of like suave with it. You're kind of just like sneaking in, being like, you don't see that poodle over there. No, you don't. And you're using your body as much as you can as you're orchestrating kind of your dog, throwing food in a direction so that your dog's face is away, but you're adding a little extra barrier with your body just in case they pop their head up, orient to you, being like, why did the food stop or whatever. It also adds protection from any off-leash dogs as well. So I'll do oftentimes like a magnet hand where I have a handful of food in my hand, my dog has their nose to my hand, or I'm rapid firing food into a corner. Then I have my other hand throwing food at the off leash dog, but I'm also orchestrating myself in a way where I'm always between me and my dog and the trigger. My body's always kind of in between. So that's kind of like hockey goalieing.
I was talking to I just finished an episode that's going to come out before this one about mental health and reactivity. And my guest, who's a social worker and counselor, was saying like how much communication is body language versus like what you're verbally saying. And so that hockey goalie image totally put that in my head of like, what kind of body image is that telling people? Body image.
Yeah,
language is that giving people about like what you want them to do in that moment. Like it's pretty clear, go away. Leave us alone.
And I add sometimes a stop sign hand and I say no intros. It doesn't open to that conversation of like, oh, are they not friendly? And I'm like, maybe they just, I don't know. But like, I hate that term of like, oh, your dog's unfriendly. But like, it's just like no intros. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they're, something's going on with them or whatever. Or maybe I just don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Like, no intro. Sorry, Amanda, you were going to say something.
No. Nicole, I need to adopt your stick out your hand and say no intros, because sometimes, speaking of body language, even when I do I think I'm being extremely obvious when I like literally like turn my back, I'm blocking the dog with my body. I'm turning my back to someone and they're like, oh, hey, like they just wander over. It's like, no. So, I guess the bottom line is like, you can't always assume everyone around you knows what you're doing or that you have a reactive dog, or, not everyone is, we're pretty fluent in reactive dogs and not everybody is. So just being really obvious, like Nicole said.
Yeah, I have been with clients where we're running away for like an extended period of time, running away from someone else's dog. And it's like, can't you see that we're literally running away from you? Let's move on to apartment living, because that's kind of wrapped into the general city conversation, but I think it's its own beast, is like apartment and condo living with a reactive dog. So what are some of the ways, and there's going to be some overlap here, but what are some of the ways that condos and apartments specifically are more difficult if you have a reactive dog? Amanda, do you want to go first?
Nicole is definitely better suited to speak to this, because I know that she's lived in a condo. I did recently work with a client with a dog in a condo. I think like the number one for me would be elevators, like just navigating the elevators. And now, I think that for me, when I worked with my condo clients, was that was a whole thing, because especially getting on. So say, for example, you need to vet the elevator before you get on and make sure there isn't a dog in the elevator, but you don't want to be so far away that you miss the elevator. So like, I'm sure Nicole will know exactly what to, because I was a little bit like stuck on that. I'm like, how do we see into the elevator without like, actually, we don't want to be too close at the same time. So anyway, Nicole, please enlighten us. How do you do that?
So with regards to Peanut, I've lived in 3 different like apartment condo settings where there was elevators, I didn't have a backyard, all that kind of stuff. And they were all different in their setup and their accessibility for me, ranging from one where there was only one entrance to the building. You couldn't go even through the parking garage. I lived on the 32nd floor, so taking the stairs was not an option. And so like there was a lot of just like difficulties around that. And the lobby was really, really, really narrow, and there was always an elevator down. So it was just a lineup of people usually waiting for the elevator. To the other, side of things. And I lived in, on the 4th floor in this one building. It was like really low security. So like there was lots of entrances and exits. So I could take the stairs, and I had less run-ins, but I struggled a lot because that building had a lot of people with accessibility issues. So there was a lot of walkers and wheelchairs and things like that. And Peanut really struggled with that. So like I've lived through like various like lifestyles with regards to like condo living. And my biggest thing that I kind of coach my clients on is what route is going to reduce your probability of run-ins. So if you can, go all the way down to the parking garage and exit through that, that can help. When you get onto an elevator, of course, vet it like Amanda was saying, but just know you're going down, people are going to be getting on. And that's going to be the hard part. And then you have the issue of getting off that elevator and there being people congregating around the elevator to come on. So in those situations, if you don't have the parking garage option, maybe you get off just a floor before, and then you take the stairs down from there. If you can't, you live way too high up, you can't take the stairs all the way down. So that's like the issue of going down. When you're going up, for the most part, not a lot of people are getting on unless you have a floor with amenities, right? Where you have the laundry room or like the workout room or the events room or something like that, where they might be coming on. So you kind of know, oh, if it stops at, the fourth floor, people might be coming on, right? Odds are when people are coming on in that situations, it's probably just people and not, FedEx guys or any dogs, right? So it's like knowing kind of like the probability and the data of it, the elevator logistics is important. And then of course, corners and thresholds and doorways, right? Having your, again, goalieing happening where you're not letting your dog kind of nose through corridors and corners. So then you're kind of ahead of them so you can check, right? That can be really helpful. That's an important thing to, on the other side is training behaviors around that too. But I call these like sticking points when you're walking through a condo or an elevator or an apartment building, your check-in points. Those are your sticking points of where you might have a run-in that might not be good. So you're doing some sort of feeding of some sort or training a behavior around those, sticking points to make sure that you decrease your probability. And then you have your contingency plans of like, okay, if somebody's coming, where are you going to go hide? Mail rooms are really great for hiding in. Sometimes there's alternate elevator banks that you could go and hide in. So sometimes they have it separated where there's the elevators going down to the ground floor, and then they have separate elevators for the parking garages, so you can run to those. So you can play around with that, different kind of exits and entrances into the building.
Yeah, it comes to mind like the behavior specifically of teaching your dog is like, checking in with you at certain points, getting behind you, potentially waiting. So like a wait queue. Is there anything else that like specific behaviors that you teach?
I do a lot of like eye contact, but I mostly train it that we're building contextual cues. So elevator door opens doesn't mean we go out the door. We're doing a sit stay usually in that situation. When it comes to like going around corners, I always just say we're going to just yes and feed around the corners. Over time, what was going to happen is our dog's going to kind of be like, every time I go around this corner, I get a piece of food. Hey, what's up? And they look up at you and you're just like, yes, perfect. So any type of orienting to you, because when that happens, they look at you, you can either grab a handful of food because you're like, oh crap, there's a dog coming, right? And then you can be ready with, a handful of food, guiding your dog to your contingency hideaway spot in those kind of situations. So I don't train like logistically, like behavior specifically, but I kind of train like a check-in or just like a pause of like, just like wait for me to give the okay, we're going to continue through this door or this elevator.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of great tips for people to think about. Amanda, do you have anything to add?
Oh, just that, listening to Nicole talk, you could do an entire course just on condo.
Working on it.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Working on it. It's almost done. It's getting there.
It's needed. It's needed for sure. I wanted to talk a little bit about breed considerations, with the caveat that like, if you have a breed that maybe doesn't do well in the city and you already have that dog, there's no shame or guilt there. Like you have the dog, that's fine. We'll work around it. We'll find a plan for you. But I do want to acknowledge that certain types of dogs are going to inherently be more difficult in the city. Herding dogs, I feel like I pick on herding dogs constantly. They have so many great attributes and I actually really like working with them. But they come to mind when you think about dogs who like are likely to struggle in the city, especially more intense herding dogs that are going to be very, very aware of like movement, everything, kind of are bred to scan the environment and kind of notice everything that's moving and going on around them. And the other thing that comes to mind with breed is that certain dogs essentially need to run or need pretty good amount of exercise. If you don't have a backyard and you don't have a car to like go rent a sniff spot or drive somewhere to exercise them, and you can't go to the dog park because maybe they're not friendly with other dogs or people, that can be a really big challenge. And so I think, like, on one hand, if you haven't gotten your dog yet, it's worth looking into what living with certain breeds looks like, so that you can decide if your environment and what you can reasonably provide is going to be okay for that dog. Also worth looking into dogs that tend to be a little bit more prone to reactivity, if that's something that you're concerned about. Do either of you have anything to add to that, breed and city life? Or is that kind of everything?
I think for me, it's important to kind of keep in mind that, like, any type of dog you get, they're going to have their hangups. You know, genetics are pre-programmed, okay? Even if you do all the things during puppyhood, these things will still happen. You got to keep in mind, like, what is that dog essentially bred for? Was their like working, title? And just, accept the fact that, like, if you have a German Shepherd and you're in a condo on the 30th floor, you're going to run into a lot of people in close quarters. Okay. Let's just say you live at, close to a throughway like street that's really busy with lots of bikes, and you have a herding dog. I have this Brittany Spaniel I'm working with now. She loves bikes. She likes to chase them. And they're right near, a really great bike path. And I'm just like, yeah, she's going to lunge at all those bikes. It's going to be so much fun for her. So just kind of like, like there's going to be breed types that are going to have their own unique struggles no matter what you do for training. And where you live is definitely going to play a factor on their success. And whether you haven't gotten the dog and you're considering it, or you already have the dog, just know, like, we get your struggle, and it's very real. But there's things that we can definitely do just to make your life a little bit easier too.
Amanda?
I was just going to acknowledge that I have had clients and seen people with high energy, high exercise need breeds in downtown Toronto, and their dogs are thriving, and it's all down to the guardian's level of commitment. One example, I have to say, I had a client with a German short-haired pointer. Those dogs probably need like hours and hours of exercise every single, like, we're not talking every week, we're talking like every single day they need like hours and hours of high impact exercise, right? But this client could not have been more committed to his needs. Would take him for all the walks, and she would take him out. Really, he was reactive as well, so that added an extra layer. But she would take him out. She felt comfortable taking him out really early in the morning, like even when it was like still dark and all that. If you really want your dog to have like running around chasing a ball, just maybe use a long line, so that way
110%. I do that
there you
all the
go.
time. I use a
Yeah.
long line. Technically, that is illegal. Your dog's supposed to be on a 6-foot long leash.
I know.
So I just wrap it up and go, yeah, 6 feet.
Yeah. I only learned about that like 2 weeks ago, that apparently in Toronto you're not allowed to have more than, so if I have like an 8-foot leash, I'm gonna like, but our bylaw officers don't even
They don't do anything.
like real problems anyway. So
most places have that bylaw where it is a 6-foot leash, and otherwise your dog is technically like off leash.
Off leash.
And so I think a lot of trainers forget that when they're making those recommendations, to like inform people that technically you could probably get a ticket for having your dog on a long line or a flexi leash or anything that's longer. But sometimes it's, it's weighing the risk and the benefit. And like, if I see a dog on a long line, I'm a lot less worried about them running up to my dog.
And also legally, if your dog bites an off-leash dog, even though it's off-leash in a leashed area, you're still legally liable. Or if your dog bit a kid or something like that, and your dog's on leash, you're still liable. Like, it's all things. And then it just goes to that point of that we had an incident here in Toronto where that off-leash dog in the children's park or whatever did severely injure a child.
Yeah, that was awful. So yeah, in the interest of making other people feel safe, maybe do the long line thing if you want to play some ball, and your dog can't go to the dog park or
One thing I wanted to talk about was limitations. So one thing that gives me and my clients peace, I find, in terms of working with reactivity, is acknowledging that like certain environmental factors or genetic factors or whatever can impede like the amount of progress that you're going to make. And so I think personally, my opinion is that in the city, some dogs are just going to get to a certain point, and that's as much progress as they can make if you can't control their triggers and the intensity of their triggers. And I think that some dogs will make a ton of progress, and I don't like to say reactivity is resolved because I feel like it can always kind of resurface in certain situations. But I do believe that some dogs are going to be limited by their environment in terms of like how much progress that they can make. So I wanted to get your opinions on that. If you agree with that, if you feel like what are your thoughts on that? Are there limitations in the city in terms of how much progress you can make with reactivity? Nicole, you look like you have thoughts.
Well, I said at the beginning, like Peanut's still reactive. And like that's never going to get better. But I think we were chatting about this before, and I told Amanda, save it. But we talked about, and you were talking about your clients who had moved to the city and they're actually doing better. The access to practice. I lived in this one part of the city where there was just like so many skateboards and electric scooters and things like that. And that at first, when I moved there, oh my God, it was just like Peanut would lunge at all of those things really intensely. And she got so much better because I got so much practice that like skateboards were no big deal. And I moved, and we don't see a lot of skateboards where we are now. And so when I do see skateboards, she's a menace. And it's just like, there's going to be ebb and flow with your training progress. There's always going to be hills and valleys. There's regressions, progress, right? All that kind of stuff. Just know, like, this will be always a part of your dog, right? And the practice component is a huge, part of it. So getting that practice in, rehearsing, training with your dog is really an everyday thing. You're never going to not be doing it. So I think that's an important part when you have a dog like that in the city or not. It's a lifelong commitment.
Yeah, that's very true. I think as like behavior professionals, we're in a way moving away from the idea of like fixing reactivity or resolving reactivity. And I always talk to my clients about it. Like, if you had an anxiety disorder or depression, would you say, oh, I fixed the depression, or I resolved my anxiety? Probably not. No, like maybe you have better coping skills and you've treated it and it's better and it's more manageable, but that doesn't mean that you're not someone who's predisposed towards those mental health issues. And I think the dog is the same way, especially like if you had anxiety and you couldn't control your exposure to the things that make you anxious and you're just constantly in a state of anxiety, right? That actually might be a good lead in to behavior medication. And I want to start with the caveat that like we're not vets. And so we're going to tiptoe around this in a way that is not recommending medication. And it's something that you should speak to your vet about. But what I want listeners to kind of understand is that if your dog is in a state of constant fear and anxiety, and it's preventing them from having a good quality of life, or if they need a lot of exercise, for example, meeting their needs, that's a quality of life and a welfare issue. And so that is like, there's no shame in talking to your vet about how we can help them from like a medical standpoint and viewing this as a medical issue and not just a training issue. So I just wanted to put that out there because some dogs, if they can't get out of a living situation that is going to cause them a lot of stress, then it's a kindness to treat that issue from a medical standpoint. Amanda, I'm laughing at you trying to block your cat from going into the screen.
No, he chose a great time to like get into my headspace. Yes to everything you said, and obviously I'm not a veterinarian, but I've been reading a lot more recently about the possible link between pain or discomfort and reactivity. So maybe your dog is also in some sort of pain or discomfort, and that's making their reactivity worse. So we could treat that, and then maybe we'll see a lot of improvement after we've treated whatever's making them feel unwell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like a whole picture of like your dog's overall wellness. And we need to consider the fact, like, when you're not feeling well, I'm sure you're a little short with your partner, or you're less likely to do probable behaviors at work because you don't feel good, right? Like, you got to consider all of those factors when you're looking at your dog, and wondering why they aren't able to do XYZ, like what you see on social media, or why their reactivity is so severe some days and not some other days, and things like that. It's a whole picture, and we definitely, in a lot of cases, and I work pro bono for some with this rescue, where we're seeing a lot of dogs, with really complex struggles, and it's just like, this should be a first line defense, speaking with the vet and getting them on board, not just behavior. It's a team effort, and I'm really hoping that we can, build that connection a little bit better, and communication between the vet team and dog trainers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Before we wrap up, I want to talk a bit about, okay, so you're not walking, you have a cat dog, as Nicole said, or you're skipping down, you're walking every other day or whatever, but your dog still has exercise and mental enrichment needs. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on in this kind of realm is the idea of decompression walks. So a lot of clients will prescribe that they go to a quiet area and do sniffy walks on a long line or off leash if it's safe and legal. And so obviously in a city environment, that's hard. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on like creative solutions to meet that, like decompressing in nature need, the sniffing need, and just to meet your dog's needs if it's really restricted in terms of like how you can exercise them. Nicole, do you want to go first?
I think I'm just always like in this, like, what is exercise?
Yeah.
And how important is it? And I think it's just like, just walking isn't the only option we have. And I definitely like to invite people to be curious about other forms of activity for our dogs, and interest-based activities. So, it could be as simple as sitting on the couch, and instead of putting your dog's kibble in a bowl, you stand there and throw kibble as far as you can, which is always fun. When I moved into our now house, I was just like, oh my God, just think about the range I can get on my treetops now. I love to just stand at this one part of the house and just see how far I can huck it across the house when I'm not going to be walking my dog that day. So I think we need to just like keep that in mind of like, that's activity, that's exercise. So don't try to complicate it too much. Don't think, oh, I have to go out and buy a bunch of puzzle toys then. There's so many accessible enrichment and exercise activities that are tapping into your dog's interests, very accessible, and there's a lot of great social media accounts you could be following for ideas like that.
Mm-hmm. I can even think about linking some of those in the show notes. Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I think Nicole made a good point that, walking's not the only way to exercise your dog and not the only way to enrich your dog. You can certainly do all kinds of stuff indoors. Sorry, my cat's really getting into it. But yeah, I will say that, when I'm walking a reactive dog, we're not just marching down the street. Like it's not a marathon. Like we're stopping along the way. We play this little game, the magical treat tree, where I smush some treats into a tree trunk and the dog has to sniff them out. Like, and basically what I do is like, I use the environment as like, the environment is like the enrichment. Like we smush trees in a tree trunk and the dog has to sniff them out. It's the magical treat tree. Or we're doing the parkour and like we're utilizing the environment and like jumping up on stuff.
And you can do that only a few feet out your door.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And and I think like, I may have exaggerated how much, Toronto, I don't know if I didn't mean to, but like I think you can find nature in a city. You just have to know where it is. And I think like, unless you're in a part of a city that really is like a concrete jungle with you can't find a single blade of grass, like usually you should be able to find like a patch of grass or some kind of green space, right? So just like, I think Nicole, you were saying earlier, like you just have to find where those places are.
Oh yeah, like when I lived in
Yeah.
that condo that was like on the 32nd floor, like we were downtown Toronto proper, where it was like really hard to find a grass space.
Right.
But there was always this one little boulevard with some, like dirt planters that always, sufficed if I wasn't able to venture further with Peanut.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it just the only thing I'll underscore is like it's all about getting creative and just utilizing what you have and how can you make your dog's life enriching in the space that you have. And I certainly on my walks with reactive dogs encourage as much sniffing as possible. We do as much loose leash walking as possible, and we incorporate games and enrichment activities into the walk so they're not just like marching down the street. And like I said, the alleyways and seeking out those little nooks and crannies where we could have like a quieter, away from the hustle and bustle. So
It always blows my clients' minds. I find when I tell them like, walking in a straight line isn't very good exercise for your dog. But people
and
just
it's
that's
boring.
great. That's what everyone tells you.
That's like I think that's so great to kind of mention is like I used to be like just a plain old dog walker, like your standard dog walking service, and I've kind of moved away from that. But I was covering for a dog walking client of mine or colleague of mine for the last few days, where the job is, yeah, you just pick up the dog, you walk them, you might like you do some sniffing, exploring, things like that. But that's kind of like the general umbrella of the job, where I started introducing these things called supportive and enrichment walks, where I'm doing a variety of things. This morning, I worked with one dog, Frankie, where we did a couple puzzle toys. We did this fun, like homemade enrichment toy that I made with some towels. He absolutely loves that because he likes dissecting and he likes to snuffle. And then we did some nose work, and then all of a sudden he was biting me, and I was like, cool, you want to play some tug? So we went outside, we played some tug and things like that, and then we did a little bit of reactivity training, and then he was completely done. And then this next dog, I went out and we did some rally obedience style kind of like heel work. Then we did some parkouring. We did this full like jumping sequence that was very agility-esque with regards to like the send-offs. And then we did some tug and fetch and things like that. And then we definitely did a treat search because this dog needed enough moment to rev down. And those sessions are only 30 minutes. And those dogs, I feel like, got more out of the dogs that I was walking for an hour in a group. And a lot of people kind of give me pushback of like, oh, these sessions are only 30 minutes. I'm like, if I don't bring your dog back tired, I will refund you your money. I promise you that. And they're just like, send me a photo of their dog, like literally KO'd, like one of those like squished face moments, because they slept so hard after our 30-minute session.
What are the benefits of living in the city with a reactive dog? I feel like we've touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to give it space because before we started recording, we were talking about how negative it can seem to just talk about all the struggles. But there are benefits to living in the city. Anecdotally, I have had clients where they find that the reactivity is better in the city, maybe because it's so constant, the traffic and the people and the dogs are so constant. And then I've had other people where it's like their dog is nervous of cars, but if it's a constant stream of cars, it's fine. It's just like if they're in a country road and one car is driving, that's a problem. And so that definitely like exists, that there are some dogs that are more bothered by weird things like in a standalone way versus like a constant stream of things. Nicole, do you want to talk about some of the benefits of city living?
I think a big thing that I'm working on with one dog, he's a Frenchie, so he gets really fixated when he sees dogs and he will just like stare, like there's nothing stopping him. So I feel like, dogs who have this propensity for fixation and staring, the longer duration of time you see the trigger, the harder it's going to be. So in the city, odds are you don't see a trigger for very long, like at all, like in a lot of situations. You also have this unique ability to set up training sessions because of all the streets. So if you're like, this is a street where everyone's kind of passing to head to a park, right? They're all going up to this major street and then walking along that major street. You're on one of the side streets and you can adjust your distance, and you got this great organic ability where they're only just passing the street. So you're going to see them for maybe like about 5 seconds. and you can adjust your distance accordingly. And if you kind of hover near an alleyway while you're doing that too, you also have an exit point for any dogs that might appear on that street. So like there's a really great logistics of setting up for things like that. And then you also can use cars and the ability to build parameters around that of like how your distance between that dog and which way you're going to kind of heading on when you're doing these training setups, and whether you have cars helping you build some barriers of visual barriers from seeing the trigger.
That's a lot of great points. It's funny because we talk about how much is in the city as a problem, but it actually is a benefit because there's like more visual
so much
barriers,
practice.
more things to hide behind, and more practice. Yeah. Amanda, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think Nicole summed it up perfectly. And just the bottom line, I guess, is I think you already said it, Tess, just more opportunities to practice. And I can't end this podcast episode without mentioning pattern games, because I took your wonderful pattern games for reactivity class last summer. And we use the pattern games. I use the pattern games with my reactive dogs. And, because we have so many opportunities, because there's so many triggers, we have so many opportunities to do the pattern games. And they work so well, and they just make the walks fun. So even though there are a lot of triggers and a lot of stuff going on, we always have our pattern games. So, or we have the barcore or whatever. So I end up having a blast with my reactive dogs because we're playing a game, we're doing the barcore, blah, blah, blah. Like there's always something like going on, and they just seem so engaged and so happy, and everyone's having fun.
And if you're not having fun, don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Yeah, it's funny because there's this like misconception that reactive dogs are like untrained and that's why they're reactive, when really most of the time reactive dogs get way more training and engagement with their family than non-reactive dogs.
Yeah.
Is there anything either of you want to add before we wrap up about city life with a reactive dog?
No. Just
thank
you for bringing us here to talk about this.
I think it's good to have you here because I do get pushback sometimes on my social media posts from people just feeling like, oh, well, your advice is impossible, or like, I can't, there's no way for me to execute that in the city. And I understand that frustration. And I also think that like one of the main themes of today has been creativity. And so it's not that it's impossible to do any reactivity training in the city. It's that it takes some creativity and like reframing of what that is going to look like. Amanda, you look like you were going to say something.
Oh yeah, just to add to the benefits, I think just like when you know your area well, and all the, like I keep saying nooks and crannies, like all the little spots. It's like, oh, here's a doorway we could jump into if there's a trigger passing. Here's a garbage can we can hide behind. Like you start to learn where everything is. And I know it'll seem very daunting at the beginning. You're like, oh my God, that's a lot to remember. But I swear, I promise you, like the more you do it, you'll just like, it'll be like second nature. Like you won't even, of course I'm going to jump behind this garbage can. Of course I'm going to jump into this doorway. And the last thing I was going to say quickly was that one of my clients said that when she's walking her reactive dog early in the morning, she'll see other guardians of reactive dogs also walking their dogs in the morning. And it's like they have this little secret club.
Yeah.
Oh, walking your reactive dog, eh? So like that's maybe something you might not get in like a rural environment, or maybe you would, I don't know, but I feel like it might be more common in the city to
feeling
see, like,
less isolated.
Reactive dog owners. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's so lovely. And yeah, I think you hit it on the nail there, Amanda and Tess, like in regards to oh my God, I forgot. Oh shoot.
Creativity
fell into my brain. Anyways, agreed, ditto. But yeah, that was like perfect.
One thing that I saw that I think is a good kind of quote to wrap up on is the Toby Project, which a lot of people have seen, is basically a reactive dog guardian who posted her entire journey with her reactive dog. And one of the things she said is like once she got the management and training she was going to use, once it got really strong, it felt like they were dancing together. And I thought it was like the most beautiful little quote, because it does feel like you're dancing if you have this like communication system that you're always using with your dog, right?
Yeah. Sorry, that's what I was getting to was like, yeah, like before I meet with a client, I look at their place, where they are, what I'm mapping out which street are you going to be turning down, and contingency building, scenario building. And it does become a dance, especially with condo navigation as well. It's going to become muscle memory. And that's how you're going to exist to that point of you don't even realize you're training your dog because your body's just doing it for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I love that quote because I always wanted to have a dancing ability, but I can't dance to save my life. Like I'm the most uncoordinated person. But yeah, when I'm kind of doing my games and stuff with a reactive dog, it does feel a little bit like you're
Get into the
dancing. It's like,
groove.
oh my God, maybe I do have some skill, like some body
Yeah.
movement skill.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Nicole, for joining us this episode. I'm sure that this conversation will help a lot of city dwellers think about new ways to help their reactive dogs, and will probably make life at least a little bit easier on both them and their dogs. For more information on where to find Amanda or Nicole, check out our show notes. Thank you both.
Thank you, Tess.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Reactive Dog Pod. Please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review so more reactive dog guardians can find me. If you need help with your reactive dog, I offer one-on-one support, group training, and an online membership, all available virtually worldwide. Information on where to find me is in the show notes for each episode. Thanks again, and happy training.